Hello, everyone, and welcome to the Human SOS Show. We're on episode 112, and glad to have you today. And we got already got a group of folks joining us. We've got Zaid and Tushar and Lydia and Sharon. Glad to have you guys this morning, and appreciate you being here. Anton, you want to open up our topic for the day?
Yeah, before I do that, I'm just gonna look on your profile because it still says scheduled for our top left corner instead of live. I'm just double checking, make
Okay,
sure
now
we're live. Okay, no,
a
we're
little
good.
bit
We're
of
good.
delay.
Yeah, we're good. Yeah, so good morning, folks. Thanks so much for joining. Thanks to everybody that's already on the on this show. First of all, the Human SOS show. Me and Kev get together to try to discuss how we can create more humanly sustainable workplace and society. The way that we work, the way that we live, has to change in order for us to not go down this really bad path that we're kind of headed as a total world, total society. But today we're going to talk about culture. Zaid brought it up, reached out to us. He's one of our regulars. If you don't know him, great guy. And he said, let's talk about this, something that we love talking about all the time and we haven't done in a while. So we're going to talk about organizational culture, but really focusing on what everybody should want out of a culture, right? You should want a high performance culture, something that creates really high level outcomes, both for your people and for your customer. But at the same time, you want to make sure that it's sustainable, right? When me and Kevin were talking about this and how to name this, I was like, I've seen a lot of high performance cultures that burn people out. They are very much, turn and burn, kind of bring people on, high performers, get as much as you can out of them. They burn out, you bring on the next set. A lot of these places hire a lot of people and they have a very high turnover. And, we used to say, throw stuff at the wall and see what sticks. Very little support, very little, ability to sustain that performance. So that's why we're combining those, right? What is a good culture that's going to deliver high performance, but it's also sustainable? So first of all, Kev, what's culture to you? What do you define personally as culture?
And culture is the environment we operate in, and it has to do with tone and priority. Um, Vision and mission and values have to be a part of that culture, and then leadership, where we make sure that the leadership is functioning in such a way that and this is where the sustainability comes in, is that the leader has to be operating in a sustainable way for both themselves and for the team. And so culture is a lot of different facets that we have to deal with.
Yeah, to me, it's also something that people can't define. It's something that you can't put on a piece of paper. People try to all the time, and many of the things that you say are somewhat definable. But it's really a set of attitudes, right? A set
Mm,
of attitudes between individuals that, when they come together, depicts what that culture is. It's
mm,
a set of views, right? It's that a lot of personal things that people experience on an individual level that when you combine them all together is going to be your culture.
mm.
And the components you're talking about are absolutely the components of culture. So if we're trying to set the culture, those are the things that we focus on. But we measure the culture, we want to try to understand those attitudes, right?
Yeah.
So, it's like we talk a lot about entrepreneurial mindset, right?
Mm,
We want people to have that kind of attitude. And what that ultimately means is that doesn't mean they're going to go be entrepreneurs. It means that they care so much about organization, they're going to look at it and perform in a way that it's almost as if it was their own. That ultimately, how I define entrepreneurial mindset. But high performance culture, first of all, is something that is going to have to deliver high amount of results,
mm.
right? And I was going through a soccer coach education a couple weekends ago, and it was for up to 11-year-olds, so little kids, nothing
Not
nothing
on the
too
pro circuit here, huh?
nothing too advanced here. But I was talking to the coach. He was actually the head coach for all the Colorado coaches, and I was like, "How do you set a good culture for your kids on your team?" He's like, "I demand excellence. I don't." It doesn't mean demand as in like he forces them to do it, because like I don't take anything less than their best. And when they don't do their best, I make sure I coach them, I engage with them, but at the same time, I also believe in them to be able
Mm,
to rise to a certain level of expectation. And I was like, wow, that's impressive. He starts at a very early age. But when I see him coaching live and engaging with these kids, he's super involved. He cares about them on a very individual level. He's very aware and present when he can find opportunities to coach to deliver the best, or when he can point out that we can do better. And it's not about calling somebody out. It's saying that, hey, I think you got better than this. Let's figure out how we can partner and get you to that next level. So I think that's number one part of culture is just that piece right there is taking nothing but the best from people. And I think some of the highest performing companies of our last 100 years, whether it be GE, whether it be Apple, whether it be Tesla, those CEOs, that was at the core of what they did. They didn't accept anything but the best outcomes in their products and their services, and that's why they got to the level that they're at.
Yeah, the word that comes to mind as we were talking about this is expectations. That culture is such about expectations, good or bad, and managing those expectations well is a real key. Because if we have expectations that are unrealistic, you're going to burn people out. You're going to cause them to amplify, again, the challenge most of us deal with, that I don't think people, again, keep in mind that this thing, loser, we all battle with feeling like losers. And when we set unrealistic expectations, we are going to magnify that for people, because they're going, well, I can't meet that expectation, so there's something wrong with me. And so expectations has got to be a key part of culture. And the leader is the one that has to at least demonstrate and role model that. But part of it is working with our team members. What are their expectations? And are they realistic, or are they on target, or are they within, what the vision and mission is of the organization and of the team? So, yeah, expectation, I think, is a big part of this. What do you think?
Mm-hmm. No, and that's how you set the expectations. You can't demand the best if you haven't set course for and defined what that looks like. So I think that's a really key call out there, Kev. And folks, I always like to hear you chime in. What are some of those components that you think are vital to a good culture? And also remembering that we want to sustain it over time, right? And that's the second piece of this that we're talking about today is how do I get people to perform at their best, but at the same time not burn out, not have this up and down effect all the time. I've seen it a lot in sales, right? And I haven't talked about this in a long time. Sales have these closeouts, right? We have these closeouts, close-ins. You call them different names. They're all the same thing. That really hard push in the last week, weekend, few days of the month, where people perform at a really, really high level, right? It's true. It's what happens. They're almost forced to, because everything's set up that way. We got donuts everywhere. We got energy drinks everywhere. Everybody's hyped up on energy and trying to do their best. And usually there's a good performance that happens. Problem is nobody really looks at the next week, right? Once that operational efficiency or performance, high level performance happens, what happens in the next week? Everybody goes and takes a deep breath. I'm trying to just catch my breath after last week. The performance drastically drops. So, it's wrong expectation, right? We're starting the month in a hole again, and now we're playing catch up, and that becomes a very common thing in sales circles. And I'm like, that's not the way to do it. I've done many years of sales and leading sales teams, and that was one of the biggest things that I broke down. If people need a time off on their closeout, great. Like, I expect, here's the goal that we need to happen. Let's talk about it ahead of the month, and talk about, okay, you got stuff going on at the end of the month.
Yeah.
Let's create some accountability to get ahead of the game early on. But the point is, it's not these big spikes and big drops, because the reasons I mentioned is when we have the contrast. I haven't talked about this in a while. When we have a contrast between our highest level of performance and our lowest level of performance, the bigger that gap is, the more burnt out people are going to get. That's just the truth. Because when I was in the military, we performed everything at 70 to 100% of our potential. Right? We didn't get burnt out. That didn't happen. Unless people were getting blown up, we did not get burned out. And this was because we just simply got used to that standard. But when you have that big, contrast between I'm chilling and I'm just catching my breath to where now I'm really pushing as hard as I can. That gap is where the burnout comes from, and that's what's not sustainable in people's cultures.
Yeah, and the one thing I am reminded as we're talking about this is the concept of balance. What balance is taking two opposing characteristics and finding how to keep them in the right tension. And what we're talking about, excuse me, is high performance.
You talking to yourself there.
Oh boy, that's a bad combo. Um, I have to tell you, folks, what if you've not done live stream? There is Anton and I are trying to keep, the face for the camera and all that, but we're stirring in the background. We both got our phones going and all kinds of things going on. And I'll go ahead and confess, I'm on the road right now and had to adjust lighting and all that this morning. So if you're going to do live stream, be prepared for the interesting aspects of it. So real quick, before I forget, Lee, welcome. Glad to have you. Denise, thanks for being here. Dr. Shama, good to hear from you as always. But if we over-index on either characteristic of what we're talking about today, and that is having a culture that is sustainable and that is high performance, because if you over-index on sustainability, you're going to lose a lot of energy and the power, the excitement goes by the wayside, and you become pretty relaxed and lazy, even. And but if you over-index on the high performance, you have a life expectancy of a day or two in surviving that. And so part of what we're talking about is finding that balance. And first thing, you've got to get a real good grip on both concepts and understand how to manage both extremes. But the key is learning not to over-index either way, because part of what we've got to do is be able to adjust with our team and with what's going on and things like that. There's going to be times where we're going to index more towards sustainability, recovery, things like that. And then there are other times where, like you mentioned, end of month, end of quarter, end of year, fiscal year changes, new projects. Those are times where you've got to index more towards the high performance side. And the key is to recognize the value of both and then begin to look at ways to balance the two. And again, not middle of the road is not balance. In fact, I think of it as mediocrity, and it just isn't a good place. And so learning the two different opposing characteristics and then growing in the concept, and this is the challenge as a leader, is that you got to get some wisdom in there to be able to know, okay, do I need to be leaning more towards our sustainability, or is this week going to be more, we got to push that high performance index and work it out. But if you camp in one or the other, you're in trouble.
Absolutely. I really like that point. They're not necessarily mutually exclusive, but they tend to be opposites until you find a way to find high performance through sustainability, right? I think that's really taking it to the next level and realizing that if I keep my people longer, they're going to be better over time, especially if I'm doing something. So a lot of times when you're approaching these things, it's almost like that, J-hook effect, right? In the beginning, you may even drop a little bit in performance as you start to focus on more sustainability. But that's that future vision that a leader has to have, a leader of that culture, to say, I understand the temporary performance drop, but I know that with time, I'm really going to escalate that performance and really speed it up. So yeah, those are really good points. One thing that I would say, a high performer, in order to have both and to have them, done well, we have to get away from this concept where, and this is going to be probably a hot one for most people, to where the organization owns the outcome for every person. This is where it's not up to organization. They play a vital role in it, but there still have to be individual choices to not burn out.
Mm,
Like I was actually commenting this morning when I woke up on what is it called, Better Up or something like that. It's a coaching place, and they're talking about what there's 5 steps that organization can do to avoid burnout. And I'm like, realistically, if organization doing is everything right, but the person is going home and at home not dealing with things properly, eating poorly, not exercising, not taking care of their mental health, spending all their free time on TikTok or whatever it may be, that organization can't control that all the time. That person's still going to get burnt out, even if the organizational time is good. So personal accountability, I think,
mm,
is at the core of any culture that's going to have high performance and sustainability. It's personal accountability to raise your hand and say, I am burning out or my
mm.
mental health is struggling. I need help. I need change. I need something. Not waiting for organization to come to you. It's personal accountability to ask for training for development, not wait for the company to train and develop you. It's personal accountability to notice your performance is lagging and have somebody step in and coach you and hold you accountable, whatever it may be. When people start doing that and the company has the resources, the time and desire to mitigate whatever the gap exists, that's when I think we get to that next level.
Yeah. And again, balance, but in terms of responsibility and accountability. Again, it has to be something that both the organization and the individual is finds the same expectation, and it has to go both ways. So again, we a lot of times we're seeing people that are of the mindset, well, the company owes me this and that and the other. Well, there's some truth to that, but don't we can't allow ourselves to go, well, the company's responsible for all of it. No, the company's not. If we're not communicating and we're not, like you said, raise our hand and say, hey, there's an issue here, then that's not the company's responsibility. That's our own. So once again, we see two opposing characteristics, neither of which is bad or good. They're just there, and how we deal with those and keep those in balance. And one of the things over the years, I've been a safety trainer. Well, question becomes you get into legal and ethical and all that, but who's responsible for safety? And at the end of the day, everyone is. We all carry different types of responsibility in regards to it. But anytime if we take the approach that it's the other guy's responsibility solely, we got a real problem. And the culture of the company becomes a real challenge. And I think that's where it's so important when we get into shared vision and shared mission and shared values, because when you get that as the core, then you're not opposing one another in the essential. We oppose each other, organization versus individual, in a number of areas, but we should not be opposing in terms of vision, mission, and values. Those have got to be agreed on. That has to be the common meeting ground to be able to have this high performance culture that is sustainable, because the both of us have to contribute and bring our part to the table, so to speak.
And they have to be lived right daily in order to make these mission, vision, and values create the culture. They have to be lived daily. The leaders have to set the example. Employees can't see you say something, put it on the wall, and have a nice little
Mm-hmm.
banner saying it. But then when push comes to shove, and we're facing difficult situations, difficult decisions, they see you going against that, right? Like I see that so often, right? Where companies they write these great visions, great values, and whatever, but then all of a sudden budgetary constraints start to happen, or they're about to miss quotas, or the product is not coming and happening like it's supposed to be happening. Deadlines are not being met, and all of a sudden these things that they have written on the wall are no longer what's it like in that organization. And cultures, the reality behind a culture is it takes multiple years to set a culture. You're not going to set a culture in a few weeks, in a few months, in a few quarters. It is a multi-year strategic, event that has to happen. And anytime you deviate from those things, you're not just setting yourself back a little bit, you're setting yourself back really long, really far away, if not making it impossible to ever have a good culture. Just because somebody can recite your mission, values, and vision because you've made them memorize for an interview or made them memorize in every single meeting does not mean that you're going to have those vision and values live through every person, right? So make sure that your people watch you in difficult times a lot more than they watch you in good times. They're paying attention to what you do as a leader. They're paying attention to what everybody around them does as a leader. That's another thing. Where do we start with? It's demanding, or not demanding, but expecting, right? Nothing but people's best. Well,
Right.
if your half your team sees that the other half the team, and you're allowing them not to live those vision, values and mission,
Hmm.
and you allowing them to deviate from that, maybe because they're a high performer, right? Somebody's a high performer, so they get away with whatever it is they want to do. Then the rest of those people, they're not going to do them either. They're going to say, why bother? Because what I see is that what's being rewarded is not the things that we've talked about. It's not the things written on that banner. It's something else, and that's all they'll focus on, or they'll just leave.
Yeah. Welcome, Alfred. Glad to have you with us. Thanks for being here. And yeah, that is such a key point. We can adjust in a lot of ways, but our vision, mission, values needs to be our anchor. That's what we come back to. And if we're straying away from that for whatever reason, that's a good indication it's time to call time out and reset and reconsider those and look at those things and say, hey, are we missing our priorities? Are we getting in a different direction, wrong direction? The other danger with all of this is we want to find a sweet spot. Problem with the spot means that there's assumed to be a static place that we can always stay. And, I know, Anton, you're working with cultural change a lot now, and not being able to pivot, if you will, with changing conditions, people, and so on is a real dangerous place to be. So the idea you're going to find that sweet spot and coast as a leader, you're setting a wrong expectation for yourself in that process, because our economy even right now is so insane that to think, okay, we're going to get this one spot and everything's going to be great. No, you got, as a leader, you've got to keep your finger on the pulse of things, and both internally and externally, and hold tight to both of the opposing characteristics and be able to shift. Because if you can't, boy, you're going to be in trouble.
It's
Uh,
funny you bring up our economy because our economy shows exactly that focus on high performance without sustainability,
mm,
right? And that high peak, everybody's doing great, and then all of a sudden we're coming to this big crash. Then we're going to crash it out, and then we're going to have this another high peak. It doesn't. It's not about not having high peaks and low valleys. It's about reducing the contrast between them, right? Creating more of a smoother up and down versus this big peaks, big spikes, and then big old drops. And we've come to accept that, and that's not okay. Which leads us to, like, as Aid's comment, culture. How about a culture fostered by the management that go with something like backstabbing, spying among the team, lip service communication that gives what you want to hear, but management would still want to do what they want regardless. And that brings me back to, what do people see you do, right?
mm,
If that's what you people see you're doing, they're not you doing, but your leaders doing, they're not going to care. They're going to say these mission values, this lip service that we're writing on the wall, it's irrelevant. It's just noise. It doesn't mean anything. And ultimately, this comes down to the top. That's usually where this comes from. It's not the problem that's starting from the front line. It's not the bottom. That's the problem that's starting from middle management. It's usually the problem that's starting from the highest level organization that's allowing that, right? Like, coming back to what I said in the beginning, setting an expectation and holding the line for nothing but the best. That
mm,
is not the best. That is the opposite of the best.
mm-hmm.
And if those people are allowing it, they simply don't pay attention to culture. They don't understand that their people are the most vital thing of the organization. And we talk about this all the time, right? Everybody on LinkedIn is talking about this. Me and Kev talk about this all the time. leaders go and write books about it all the time. And I know that some of those same leaders don't act like that all the time. It's the nice thing to say that makes you look good as a leader, but when push comes to shove, when you have to have that difficult conversation with your senior manager, with your executive or whatever, and say, hey, that will not go. We are not this kind of organization where some of the things you're talking about is acceptable or are acceptable, right? Calling those people out in a private conversation, having those tough conversations is what that highest level of leader does. And then making sure that the next level does that with their lower level.
Well, and I know some people think I am maybe over the top in terms of leader responsibility, but if the culture of an organization, a team, a company, whatever, is, or back up, the culture of any level of grouping, organizational, team, whatever, if there is an issue, it is reflecting the leader's leadership and behaviors. And if there's a problem, the first place that any effective leader, especially a servant leader, goes is to the mirror and say, okay, what's going on here? Because if you don't, you're going to end up with an out of control situation. And we're not talking ruling with an iron fist kind of thing. It is about, like Anton was talking about, it's about reflecting what we say is important and living it as a leader. Because as we lead, as we walk in front most of the time, if you will, we are going to affect everyone else's behaviors, and it's not just about behaviors; it's about attitudes. One of the challenges that we face is, as leaders, will have people that are doing the right check boxes. They are stepping in line with the steps that they're expected to have, but their attitude is ineffective or even antagonistic to the team. And so we've got to look at culture very holistically. That's why, one of the things we talk about, if you as a leader or manager think that you're going to expect that your team members are leaving personal life at home, boy, you don't understand the current culture, and you are setting yourself up for a lot of problems, because the reality is none of us can separate life and work. My generation, we were as good as anybody with it, but even we couldn't do it completely. We were a little better at it because of other unhealthy behaviors, such as not dealing with our realities or not dealing with our emotions, and things that are a factor that we have taken into account. But even then, we still were not good at separating the two. And so better to set the realistic expectation that life is our life outside of work is a factor and an effect in our work environment. And leaders that don't accept that, again, are asking for trouble for themselves.
No, absolutely. And, I'm glad you bring up work and life and balance. I actually wrote a post of this again, that we always talk about work-life congruence is the reality that we need to have.
Yeah.
We don't have this line that we can draw in the sand and say, here's my work time, here's my lifetime. And the life has become much more complex, and it's harder. Like just things used to be wrong. I think it's wrong. I'm not saying it's wrong for a mother to stay home and take care of her kids if that's what the mother wants.
Yeah.
But to have that an expectation as a man, like many people used to back in the day, to where that was taken care of by a woman, man went at work, that doesn't exist anymore. Like that's not the norm. And so it's harder. The kids need somebody to get them to practices, to get them to and from school, doctor's appointments. Even if you don't have kids, you have stuff going on, right? So in order for us to really have this high performance culture that is sustainable, we have to allow people to have what me and Kevin call strategic flexibility, right? Really thinking about it long-term, big picture, not just, on a whim. It's saying, how do we make this work for each individual? Some of those components is letting people schedule their lifetime within their work time, as long as it's not interfering with meetings. And they don't need permission. They shouldn't need permission, right? If it's my free time, if it's my time to work on my own, focus on my work product, not my time put in to attain that product. That's
Right.
one of the key. That's one of the key things to a sustainable and performance culture. If we're going to get really specific, is that it's a leader. It's an outcome based leadership, right? I just need you to deliver an X product, X outcome. I don't care how much time you take. I'm paying you for the outcome. I don't
Mm.
care when you do it. I'm paying you for the outcome, right? So if people need to take whatever they got to do throughout the day and then put maybe a couple hours in the evening to do that, that's important. But that's the other side of it too. You can't expect that if it takes you 8 hours to complete something, if it takes you 8 hours to complete that, but then you keep scheduling personal time within that 8 hours and then not opening up your calendar somewhere else to make it up, that may not be a good solution either, because I'm
Mm.
seeing that a lot. And I'm like, that doesn't work for the company either. So now they're going to pull back on that strategic flexibility, pull back on giving you the freedom to do it because the outcome is not where it needs to be. So it's that give and take on both ends to say, I'm going to give you time here from the company, trusting that you're going to make it up where you're so efficient, you've become so efficient that you don't need to worry about that, right? You can get that work done in 6 hours, where my new employee may have to take 8 hours to get it done. So I think that's a really key thing. And the other thing is letting people schedule health time, just like personal things, scheduling health time, mental health, and physical time within those work hours. For me, I wake up at 5 a.m. now every day. I get, minus when I do the show, I usually get about 3 hours of work done before my work is usually beginning with my customers and clients or whatever. But then in the middle of the day, I'll take a 2 to 3 hour break to do yoga, to do, cook good lunch, hang out with the kids, whatever I got to do. I'm way better as a performer. The other thing is I'm not as good in the afternoon. So some of my really good stuff happens between that 5 and 8 a.m. and gives people the freedom to do that.
Well, and it occurs to me the fact that we think that we need a work-life balance. That, to me, if we really stop for a moment and think about that, that is it's telling us there's a problem. Okay, it's telling us that our work and our life are not congruent with each other. Okay, if we've got to balance out our time of work from a priority standpoint, expectation in terms of whether it's a negative or a positive in our life, we've got a problem where there's a misalignment. The idea being that we should be working, doing something that is an outcropping or a part of what we're about, who we are. And I think that the fact that we talk about work-life balance is telling us that where the problem is. We've got people that have chosen or been chosen for work that doesn't align with who they are, their purpose, their why. And that is a problem. And it's a big problem in our culture that we've got people that are putting in so much time and effort to earn money, to make a living, as it's called, yet it's not what is good for them or healthy for them because it's in opposition to who they are. And so this thing of work-life balance tells us that there is a problem and that we as a culture need to realign with the idea that we want people to be working in ways and in opportunities that are in alignment with who they are. And we want to blame that on, the organizations and stuff. There's some accountability for that with the organization, but the other problem is a lot of people have no clue what it is, what their why is and what their purpose is. So they are making choices based on incomplete information. And so the value of taking time as an individual to understand who, what, why for ourselves, and then begin to say, okay, is my work life so misaligned that work is such a strain and a drain that I have to then do opposing things to survive? That's miserable. It's really miserable. Welcome.
And the reality, go ahead.
Welcome, Terry. Glad to have you. Lee, it looks like maybe you're having to cut out. Get that. Have a good one. Blessings. And welcome, El Hadij and Mary. Glad to have you guys. And Sherry, glad to have you. Thank you. Go ahead, Anton.
I really like that what you just talked about because we talk a lot about sustainability has to do with burnout and stress and things like that. The reality behind those kind of things we've talked about it many times on the show is our perception of what we're doing is going to be half the response that our body's going to have towards that thing. And if we keep trying to do this opposing thing, work and life, every time we work, it becomes this thing that's burning us out, this negative thing that's dragging us down. Yeah, it's going to be way worse. Are there times, no matter how good the job is, where it's tough? Yes. But if you're going to look at it that way, it's just going to be tougher and harder on your mind and your body. So definitely, I think that's a good one. The question I'm going to have for you, Kev, is hold on one second.
Yeah. Along with technical challenges, we have family life going on as well at times, so it's interesting.
But the question that I have for you, Kevin, I think this is bringing it back to Zaid's conversation of requesting this. Cultures take time to set. Bad cultures take a really long time to break. So if somebody has a poor culture, how do you go about changing course? How do you go about resetting it and getting on the right track? What are some ideas that you would have that Zaid may encourage in his company to try to make it different? I'll be right back. I'm here. I'm listening. I just got to go do this real quick.
Okay. Welcome, Karen. Glad to have you. Well, the answer to that question is to, we talk about it in sports and when we're facing issues and challenges, and that is getting back to basics. And for culture, for organizational environment, and so on, the centerpiece of that gets back to vision, mission, values. And the good starting place is, are we with our culture and everything going on, are we basing it on our vision, mission, and values? And if we are, then there may be some minor realignment. But quite often what we have is that we have organizations that have not clearly defined, for the organization's sake or the people in their organization's sake, they haven't clearly defined vision, mission, and values. And if we understand vision correctly, that should be a non-changeable. That should be our anchor point for our organization, for our culture, and everything. Mission, that may have to adjust with time and circumstances. Mission is how we execute to move forwards towards our vision, and sometimes we have to adjust our mission. The other non-adjustable or non-changeable is our values. So if we've got solid vision and values, that is the core of what we're doing, and we're on target and aligned with those, then what we may have to do is adjust our mission to fit our current circumstances, whatever. But go back to basics. What's our vision, mission, values? Where are we in regards to that? I encourage individuals and organizations to do that on a regular basis. And depending on your situation and your level of responsibility, you should be making that visit, if you will, or taking that reset time very regularly, especially current culture with everything, in our society so changeable and moving. And so that's where agility comes in, is being able to evaluate, okay, yeah, I need to adjust, but am I adjusting away from the core of my vision and values? And if we're moving away from our vision and values, then either we made a wrong choice in how we started to begin with, or we never had clarity on it, and we've got that problem. If otherwise, if our vision and our values are really solid and strong, and we're moving away with, that's a red flag going, we have made choices along the way that are taking us away from where we should be to start with. So, sports, if your team's not executing well, you get back to basics. You run the basic drills, you do the basic exercises, and so on. And so if we've got a company or organization that's having issues, then get back to the basics. Where are you in terms of your vision and your values? Because those should be the non-negotiables. And then mission, that at that point you go, okay, well, we want to stay true to our vision and values. Is our mission aligned still in light of what we're dealing with in terms of culture, economy, and all that?
And that's a tough one to do from an employee standpoint, right? Like, because a lot of the things that you say, leader usually drives, but it's not impossible for employees to accomplish, right? It's so if your organization has vision, mission, and values, you have to request from your leader. You know, usually there's team meetings, usually some sort of forum to sit down and say, hey, can we review what it is that we're about? Can we do that once in a while? And most leaders will, at least, even the bad ones, if they're called out on the spot like that, the way that we've kind of glorified these things, rightfully glorified these things, they will look really, really bad in public eye if they were to just, push that comment aside and not worry about it. So this is where, Zaid, I would encourage, if that's the case with you, try to be that voice of the people and not be rude about it, right? Just say, hey, is it possible for us to revisit this as a team and make sure that we're all aligned? And make sure that some of those leaders that you talk about are part of that conversation. If they are higher level leaders, right, then what you can do is you try to set the example for leadership from a front line, right? Like, that's people are people, whether they're higher level than you or not. Like, we become kind of what like everybody else around us is. So if the front line is constantly doing that, there's going to be increased pressure on those leaders to start doing that. And if not, they're going to be seen that way very quickly. Now, if that doesn't change, unfortunately, you got to change jobs, because that organization is, and this is a terrible thing to say. I hate saying that to people because it's like, well, it's not that easy. It isn't. It really is. Especially, I think, for the next couple of years, it's going to get a lot harder too. But it's better to have your mental health. It's better to have that than to keep suffering through that. But at the bare minimum, start making these call outs in meetings. Start having the people around you become that way, because you are leading people without a title. If you don't necessarily have that high level leadership title, people don't need a title to lead. That's something that you can do by setting an example, by having the right conversation. Now, if there is not a vision, values, and mission set, request for that to be set. Request to have some meetings to where you as a team can come together, and yes, the leader will probably lead that conversation, but you should be the one requesting that to happen. And that's how we take back some of that power as employees and not wait for the leader to do so, right? This is coming back to that balance we already discussed, that personal accountability. I'm not going to wait for the leader to live that way. I'm not going to wait for them to create them. I'm going to request and demand that happens.
Yeah, it's called leading upwards. I train field leaders all the time, and they say, well, what if I've got bad leadership above me? And I tell them, especially current culture, there is such a vacuum of effective and good leadership that those that choose to be good leaders within what they can and control, you stand out big. One of the things that and especially depending on when you took the job and where the basis for it, but if you can't go to your leadership and say, I started with this company because I shared the vision of X, whatever X is, the first question that you need to ask yourself is, are you in the right place? Because if you can't say part of the reason that I came to work for this company is this company's value was X or the vision is Y, and now we don't appear to be there, can you help me? If you can't honestly make that request, then you've got a consideration to make about your priorities, about what you're doing with whom and so on, as an issue. And that's why for us individually, if we are struggling, and this is something I go through, and in fact, I'm kind of wrestling through with it right now, is what I'm doing still in alignment with my vision and values? If it's not, then I need to ask the question, is it time to change, or is the situation changeable? And that's part of the value judgment we have to make for ourselves. And that it's like Anton said, that's not easy. First of all, it takes a lot of confidence, and quite often it involves having faith, and making those choices is a key thing. But if you can honestly go to your leadership and say, the reason I am here is because I share this vision or value with the company, and that's changed, or something has changed because I'm having trouble aligning, then we need to ask the question, were we ever aligned to start with? So back to basics, back to where we were. Let's see, Sherry's got a couple of comments and another one from Zaid. Sherry's in agreement with us about the critical nature of vision, mission, values. And then she makes a comment that alignment with individual goals with the organization vision, mission, values is so important. And I would suggest beyond goals. If we're working for an organization, and by the way, this isn't just about a job. If you're involved in a church or any other kind of volunteer organization or what have you, and you're misaligned, ultimately the outcome is it's going to be unhealthy for you. We have to remember, if it's unhealthy for us, it's going to be unhealthy for the organization. And that's where we start getting breakdowns, is that we're both in unhealthy situations, and those aren't sustainable. Okay, either the organization is going to suffer, or the individual is going to suffer, or both. I know, I'll share from personal standpoint. I have just recently had to make a change in my church involvement. I have been with a church now from its actually beginning, as part of it when first met. And in the last week or two, I have finally had to come to a point and realize that our vision and mission and values are not aligned anymore. And I have approached them previously about things have changed, what needs to happen. Can we talk about this? Can we look at it? And that didn't happen. And that necessitated that I go, okay, is there enough misalignment here that it becomes unhealthy for me and for my part of the organization? And the reality was, yes, it got to that point. And so I've actually had to make a decision to step away from the church I was involved with to move in a different direction. And that's a struggle. I wrestled with it for a while, probably maybe as much as a year, and finally have to reach that conclusion. And I risked that I could go to another place and find a whole different set of challenges or problems, but to continue in that environment, that's knowing it's unhealthy for me and knowing that my part of the organization is unhealthy, then becomes a challenge. So this alignment with vision, mission, values, vision and values are the most critical, because those should be unchanging. Mission, we can adjust. In fact, if we're not willing to adjust our mission, we got a different problem, because the world we're in, we're having to adjust and even pivot on sometimes it feels like a minute by minute basis, just with everything going on. So Anton, any additional thoughts on that before we get to Zaid's?
Yeah, no, the vision, you've already said, it doesn't change. It should be really, really long-term thing. The way I always talk about is vision is strategy, mission is tactics, right? So, and even going simpler than that, I like always the Trojan horse analogy, right? Going to Troy and conquering Troy was the vision. It was a multi-year thing, and that's actually like, I'm trying to compress vision and mission a little bit. And they tried many different tactics, many different missions to make that happen, until they finally got inside the Trojan horse and got in there and were able to conquer Troy. So that's coming back to Zaid and tying it all together. Like you said, that they're doing these things, but are they doing them with continuity? Are they doing these different things that build on one top of another to get to this North Star, right? That's another thing that, a good way to call vision is that North Star, that guiding principle that we're always staying aligned to, that keeps driving us through the woods, through the forest, through the mountains or whatever. When we can't see where we're going, it's something that's up ahead that's pointing us in that direction. Now, the other point is ask for one-on-ones. That would be my thing. Like if you're not having one-on-ones with this leader, request one-on-ones. But this is a very kind of tactical thing to do. You have to make it seem like you're there to learn from them. You have to feed into their ego. A lot of times these people's egos are hurt or too big or whatever it may be. Not always a bad thing. They just don't know better sometimes. And coming from a standpoint of like, I would love to learn from you. I would love to be developed from you. But while you're also doing that, you're coaching them. You can't tell these leaders like, hey, you're doing this vision and mission thing wrong. We're doing the culture thing wrong. You need to ask tactical questions that make them have aha moments. As they're talking to you, as they're explaining some of these things, they're going to think and be like, oh, wow, I'm off course. Like I'm telling you this, but I'm not really there. And it may take a few conversations to start to kind of break through some of that thick-headedness that some people have. But coaching up is possible. You can do that. You just have to be really strategic with how you ask your questions. And if you need help, that's what coaches are for. That's what people like Kevin are for, who can step in and coach you on leadership stuff. I don't coach as much on leadership, but like that's the kind of things that coaches do. And they can sit there and say, okay, next meeting you have, let's set the picture like this. Let's kind of present everything a certain way and then pop this question and have them, ruminate on it for a while and then answer it for you. And then do that like breadcrumbs. You're leading them to a certain conclusion, leaving these breadcrumbs of questions along the way.
Yeah, one of the quotes I've developed, and this is where the concept comes in, is wisdom. And by the way, one of the things, I don't care who you are or what you're doing, if you're not looking for wisdom all the time in your life, you're going to have problems. And wisdom is not about having all the answers. Wisdom is knowing how to ask the right questions. And one of the ways that's most effective in leading, whether it's up, down, or sideways, is effective questions. Some of your most powerful leaders, especially servant leaders that have ever been around, knew how to ask the right questions. Because if we ask the right questions, people that are genuinely interested in growing and moving forward are going to want to find an answer to that question. Now, if you're in a situation that people are unwilling to answer your questions, or that you're even afraid to ask them, again, that's another red flag of, oh my, am I in a situation that I just need to get out of? Don't know. That's a value judgment. That's where you really need lots of wisdom, because there are no formulas or answers that fit every situation. Let's see what Zaid comments. Says sometimes they would tell what we are doing to align with our mission and vision, and on the surface, what we're doing sounds true, but how to approach it would not be aligned. The how-to is opportunistic and very negative. It's really interesting, Zaid. You look at organizations, and I'll include organizations that like churches. It is not quite often. It's not the dividing point in terms of vision and values. It's in execution. And we have more split and diversion among organizations over execution because what's happened is that organizations are more indexed or over indexed on execution than they are on mission and values. If you get all mission oriented, then how you go about something becomes your values rather than your mission. And we see that again, especially like I said, in churches, they'll argue over, okay, I'll pick one out that's a real common challenge among different religious organizations, and that is related to baptism. Sprinkle, dip, dunk, when you're young, when you're old, all kinds of disagreement. That's about execution. It's not about a value. The value is, what is the significance of that execution, that exercise. The value of that exercise is what's key, not the execution of that value. And so organizations have same kind of thing. Well, we're going to execute. Okay, I'll give an example that is a current challenge. The only best way to execute is between the hours of 9 and 5. That's it. And if you can't execute between hours 9 and 5, that's a problem. And executing between 9 and 5 is just a tradition that's been around. I'm not even sure. I got to go back and do a little reading research. Why 9 to 5? Because that, forever has been the tradition. There's nothing magical about the period between 9 and 5 if we step back and look at it. It may be that, for example, Anton's an early morning guy. He by 9 o'clock, he's already fading for part of the day. For me, if I'm left to my own devices, I'm more of an evening guy. And so at 9 o'clock, I may not even be ready to get going. Depends on the circumstances. So we've got to be careful not to get caught up in execution and let that divide us, but rather look at what is our real vision and what are our real values. That should drive our mission, not the other way around. And so, again, making a change is tough, but if we keep asking ourselves the same questions, then we have to consider that there is a core problem that we're not going to change or address. And if it stays unhealthy for us, it's going to be unhealthy for the organization as well.
We got to wrap up here, but finish off for Zaid. Coming to this final decision of departing is not an easy process. Talking about leaving a company when you have to. As a leader, if we are a high enough level of position, we can always change a culture, right? Mm-hmm. As people, we can do everything we can to influence it and then move it in the right direction. But sometimes you have to come to a realization that it just doesn't fit. There's what Kevin talked about with his church and things like that. The thing is, what most people do is they stay to a breaking point, right? They get to a point where they break and they have to leave because they can't do it anymore, versus being strategic and recognizing that early on, putting in steps to make the transition while you're still there, not to a point where you're completely burnt out and now you can't even look for work because you're just in such a horrible mental place. So put in the work, take personal accountability to change your environment, and however small those steps with consistency, start looking for a new thing, whether it be building your own business, whether it be looking for working for somebody else, changing careers altogether, right? Like I did it the wrong way, kind of. I moved out of a position, but then I still stuck around and kind of made money while I prepared to go and do something else, right? Like I for a year, I worked for a company that I no longer wanted to be part of because of some things that happened. But at the same time, I knew I needed that runway to launch whatever the next thing was coming. So be strategic about it. If you need to leave, don't just cut the cord, slowly build that process, but don't wait until you completely burn out.
Quickly, Zaid asked the question, can we say that execution is 50% of the whole process? In my estimation, I would say execution should be the smaller part of it. More critical part is what's our vision and values, and that should drive, and execution should follow. It shouldn't lead. And so thanks, Sherry, for that information. That somehow rings in the back of my mind of history on 9 to 5, that was establishing 8-hour workday and so on. But start with yourself. If you want to be a leader, you start with you. You don't start with what is everybody else's responsibility. What is my responsibility here? What is my vision, my values? And then once we understand and establish that, then we can say, okay, how can I execute to do that? And can I do that execution in partnership with this organization or that organization? And when we can do that and say that honestly we can, then we may have a fit. But if we are always going, I don't like this, this is the wrong way, I'm always battling against it, before you allow it to tear you down, how much the seeming security of a paycheck, how much value does that bring if you ultimately end up ill and you end up unhealthy and in a bad spot and other things, weigh the value there, because we see too many people, by the time they make a change, the damage is done, and it's quite often irreversible. Be careful. If your culture, you're always battling the culture, you may be in the wrong culture. Doesn't mean give up quickly, because you may be the leader, untitled leader, that brings about the change for the benefit of others. And there is a way to lead upward, and it's not by starting starting a rebellion and doing all that. We see that as one option, but better option is to lead change by example, and it may be incremental. Maybe one change a little bit at a time, or one question, or whatever. So, high, high. Well, our culture is critical, and it can be high performing, and it can be sustainable all at the same time if it's done well. Key is we got to keep the balance among all the different parts and remain agile. To use another popular buzzword now, is we got to be agile, because the world around us is changing. So stay true to your essential vision and values. Everything else got to be ready to adjust and change. And
thank you all for joining. Just heads up to you, actually, and to everybody else. I won't be here next week. I'll be in Mexico. So actually, I'll be coming back from Mexico on that day. So I can't even join from
come on now. We've
done the airplane.
We've done the plane. We know it can be done.
But yeah, so it'll be Kevin on his own next week. If you guys feel like you want a specific topic, let us know in the comments right now. If there's something that you'd like to hear, we've really enjoyed having people reach out and messages to us, or writing them in comments. Just letting us know what topic you want to discuss that has to do with working or living in a sustainable way. That's a very broad spectrum thing. So just let us know.
Very good. So blessings. Have a great rest of your week. I'll see you back on Tuesday. Got topics, tell us, and bring friends along, and follow, please. #HumanSOS. That's what we're about. That's what we're after. That's our part of our vision and our values. So please, if you feel led to support us, do it, please. Take care. We'll see you next week. Anton, travel safe.